So last week we talked for very briefly about my father and my interaction on the plane on the way down to Pennsylvania, and whether or not the command to bind these commandments on your arm and make them to be totafot, frontals between your eyes, was a physical command or not. Now, the Stevens family writes in, they say, we were thinking about your discussion regarding Tefillin, and it reminded me of a recent discussion with one of the moms in one of our children's music class. I'm trying to keep names out of this. She and I used to go to church together, and it turns out that we both enjoy asking lots of questions, much to the chagrin of her pastor. So, he was preaching through Luke recently, and when he taught on Luke 22:36, he said that the money bag and the knapsack should be taken literally, but the sword should be understood as a metaphor for the Word of God. I would strongly disagree with that, by the way. Her question was, why the change midstream from literal money bags and knapsacks to spiritual swords? Where are the textual clues that lead us to understand that he meant sword as a metaphor for Bible when the disciples, there was a question mark there, for Bible. When the disciples respond that they have two swords, do they mean that they have two Bible scrolls? So in Deuteronomy 6, what are the textual clues that lead us to understand that the binding on the hand and the tefillin between the eyes are metaphors? If verse 6 is the summary statement and verse 7 through 9 explain what verse 6 looks like, why would the first and last examples be literal and the middle example be spiritual? We literally teach them diligently to our children as we go through the day. We literally write them on the doorposts, but we figuratively bind them to our hand and have them as tefillin between our eyes. Okay, and they go on. And thank you for the question. I have actually brought this up. Now, for those who didn't hear our show last week, those who might be tuning in with us for the first time on TuneIn Radio, or if you stumbled upon this on YouTube, then my argument against my father on the plane ride to Pittsburgh, or to Pennsylvania rather, was that I believe that the command in Deuteronomy 6 to bind these things on your arm and have them be tefillin, that's the totafot is the Hebrew word there. I believe that this is actually a metaphor. Now, before we start getting all sorts of email here, I want to make it very clear. I still bind tefillin in the mornings. I do that because I find it helpful. I do it because I enjoy doing that. It makes me, it puts me in a place of prayer that I enjoy, and so on and so forth. So there are many reasons why I actually bind tefillin. And not only that, it's a tradition that's been passed down all the way since before the time of Yeshua on earth, right? Okay, because we found them we found tefillin at Qumran and whatnot. I was going to do this beforehand. I didn't though. I was going to look up and see what the earliest writing on the doorpost was. Any clues on that, Rob?
From the ancient world, we don't have a lot of. I think there might be some things thought to be mezuzahs found, but we have the little. It's a little silver scroll. They think it was like a little scrolled up of a version of the Birkat Kohanim,
Mm-hmm.
Lord bless you and keep you, and it's a little silver plate with it inscribed on there, and then it was rolled up, and they don't know if it was used as like a necklace or something. This is a great discussion. I think they're both true. Here's why, and I think that. Was it the Stevens family who sent in the comment about Luke? We at our community, we've been reading Luke also this year, and we recently saw that. And I looked at, there are a handful of commentaries that say just what she said the pastor was indicating, that somehow swords were metaphorical. I don't think that's true. People weren't able to carry whole Bibles around with them. I mean, could you imagine? First of all, the book didn't exist. We didn't have.
You see some guy coming with a backpack just packed with scrolls.
Well, the Codex, right? Yeah. So the Codex, what we call a Codex, is a book that's got pages, written on both sides, bound on a common spine. Yeah, that was not. That's something that comes later on the scene. But scrolls would have been. it just wouldn't have made sense for them to have scrolls. So I think that very much was literal.
Are they just trying to get? But are they just trying to get away from the idea that Yeshua told them to take their sword?
Yeah, we had a great discussion. Nice. No, we had a great discussion on that in our community study, and I think these guys were going to be vulnerable. They were going to be without Yeshua. There are all sorts of bandits and criminals out there that looking to take advantage of people. But if they saw guys, a group of guys, and a couple of them at least had a sword, those are just.
So Yeshua is telling us that he believes in our First Amendment rights. If that's not anachronistic, I don't know what it is. Heat. Okay, so
back to Shema. Shema.
And actually, I want to read this real quick. I'll give you my interpretation of this real quick. Okay, he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Okay, there is the statement. The command is in 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your might. To me, that's the command. Okay, that is the command. Everything after this is basic expressions of that. Now, I think that it's all essentially metaphorical.
Adam, if you roll a scroll real tight, it could be used to hit someone over the head or something like. Okay.
Okay. So you shall love.
Yes.
In 6:6, all of a sudden we shift now. These words which I command you today shall be on your heart. Okay, that's true, but should they literally be on your heart?
Right, so then we're getting into metaphor.
Now we're getting into
metaphor.
This
a little bit last week, like written on the heart. What does this mean? Writing on the heart. It says the sins of, what is it? Jeremiah. Sins of Judah are written with an iron pen. These are metaphors, and we don't have in the Tanakh. We don't have anywhere else where this seems to be being observed. It's different than tzitzit. Now, of course, the tzitzit are part of the commandment of the proper Shema, right? I mean, Numbers 15, the end of Numbers 15 is part of the recitation of the Shema passages. But yeah, and the dispute is, like we talked about last week, it's not, it's an old dispute. The early rabbinic in the Megillah, it says that for people who are already immersed in study, that this command of binding, the literal binding, is not obligatory.
Well,
it's for people that aren't going to have the time to sit and immerse themselves in study of the Word that are obligated to do this practice.
You have the Stevens family brings up the writing on the doorpost. The Mezuzah. Once again, I have Mezuzahs on every single doorpost in my house. Except
you broke mine, man.
I apologize. Except for
I gotta get a new one.
I know. I should send you a new one. I touched. I went to Rob's house.
It was barely hanging on.
It was barely hanging. I just touched it and the thing fell off, man. Anyway, so I have Mezuzahs on every single doorpost in my house except for the bathroom, as is tradition. However, I don't think that that's an actual physical commandment. I don't think that if a person doesn't have mezuzahs on their door that they're breaking the commandment. I think that it's metaphorical, that the commandments are supposed to encompass your entire life. And I would say that even about you shall teach them diligently to your sons and shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way. This is metaphor. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. Obviously, the command is that this command should encompass your entire life. So should you teach your children this? Absolutely. Should you talk about it all the time? Absolutely. But the rabbis take this literally to mean that you shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. When you lie down and rise up, they say that you have to say set morning prayers and set evening prayers. So are we taking that literally too? Or are you going to pick and choose what's literal and what's not in this passage?